The fog signal was off by 4 seconds the first night, and the log says it wasn't. I'm the one who wrote the log. I want to be clear about that before anything else, because it's the part that matters most. Not the 4 seconds, not the signal, the writing. I sat in the watchroom at Point Sur Light Station with the maintenance logbook open to the October page, and the fog signal ran its cycle. 2 blasts every 60 seconds, the way Point Sur has operated since they automated the horn in 1972, and the second blast came in at 64 seconds instead of 60. I picked up the pen. I looked at the clock, and I wrote interval normal without deciding to. My hand just did it. Like muscle memory for a task I'd never performed. That should tell you what kind of person I was when I took this assignment. Or maybe it should tell you something about the assignment. I've stopped trying to separate the two. Point Sur Light Station sits on a volcanic rock about 360 feet above the Pacific, connected to the coast by a single road that floods when it rains and sometimes when it doesn't. The state keeps a maintenance rotation going because the site is a historic landmark, and because the light, while mostly ceremonial now, still operates as an active aid to navigation. The Coast Guard automated everything decades ago, but someone has to be there. Someone has to check the lens. Someone has to confirm the fog signal. Someone has to write things down in the log so the log exists and can be referenced later if anything goes wrong. That someone, for 3 weeks in October, was me. My supervisor at Piedras Blancas had suggested the posting because I'd become a liability she didn't want to formally discipline. I'd been writing incomplete reports for 2 months. I'd missed a calibration cycle in August and hadn't mentioned it until the auditor caught the gap. I wasn't making mistakes out of incompetence. I was making them out of something worse, a total absence of investment in whether anything I did mattered. I showed up. I went through motions. I went home. She said I needed to reset. I think she needed me to be someone else's problem for a while, and Point Sur didn't have anyone else to be a problem for. The access road climbs steeply enough that your ears adjust at the top. The complex is small. The lighthouse tower, the fog signal building, 2 former keepers' residences repurposed for storage and relief quarters, and a handful of outbuildings losing their slow argument with the salt air. Everything faces the ocean. On a clear day, you can see gray whales migrating south. On a foggy night, which is most nights in October, you can't see the stairs in front of you. My duties were straightforward. Log weather conditions every 2 hours. Confirm the automated light was cycling correctly. 1 flash every 15 seconds, visible for 25 nautical miles. Inspect the fog signal system once per shift. Perform basic maintenance. Check in by radio with Monterey sector at 0600 and 1800. Keep the logbook current. The logbook was the most important thing, according to the briefing packet. Not because anyone reviewed it regularly, but because it was the continuous record. Point Sur has maintained an unbroken operational log since 1889. Every keeper, every relief, every Coast Guard technician has written in one. The current volume started in March. My entries would fill October. The person after me would fill November. The book would go on regardless of who held the pen. I liked that about it. The impersonality. My handwriting was just another layer of graphite on the same kind of pages, saying the same kinds of things. Visibility, 2 miles. Wind, NNW on 15 knots. Light confirmed cycling. Fog signal confirmed. Interval normal. I wrote it 19 times before I opened the manual. The operations manual was a 3-ring binder, Coast Guard standard, kept in a plastic sleeve on the watchroom desk. I'd flipped through it on day 1. Signal specs, emergency procedures, radio frequencies, a laminated contact chain in case the light failed. I hadn't read it closely because I didn't need to. I'd worked lighthouse stations before. The binder was the same everywhere, except for the insert between pages 46 and 47. I found it on my 4th night. I'd been checking the fog signal specs because the 4-second delay had started nagging at me. Not urgently, just persistently, the way a crooked frame on a wall nags. The spec page said the signal should operate at exactly 60-second intervals, 2-second blast duration, with a tolerance of plus or minus 1 second. 4 seconds was well outside tolerance. I should have filed a maintenance flag. I should have called Monterey. Instead, I turned the page looking for troubleshooting steps, and there, between the signal specs and the compressor maintenance schedule, was a single sheet of white paper printed in the same font as the rest of the manual, formatted with the same header and footer, filed in the same type of plastic sheet protector. It was labeled Point Sur Light Station, Supplemental Operating Procedures, Night Relief. I read it without suspicion. It looked like every other page in the binder. Rule 1. During fog conditions, confirm signal interval manually every 30 minutes using the watchroom clock. Do not rely on automated logging. Rule 2. If visibility drops below 1/4 mile, close and secure the door to the fog signal building. Monitor from the watchroom window only. Rule 3. Maintain radio silence between 0100 and 033 unless contacted first by Monterey sector. Fine. Every station has its local procedures, things the regulars know but never formalize, typed up and tucked in for relief keepers who wouldn't know otherwise. I almost turned the page. Then I read Rule 4. Rule 4. If the fog signal interval exceeds 60 seconds by more than 3 seconds, do not file a maintenance report. If you attempt to report it, the interval will correct itself before the transmission completes. The adjustment is external and expected. It does not require correction. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I was looking for the part that didn't sound official. The margins were right. The font was right. The footer read USCG Sector Monterey, revised 03/2019. Every element was formatted to be absorbed without resistance, the way a posted regulation is absorbed. You read it, you accept it, you comply. Whoever wrote this understood how compliance works. You don't need someone to believe a rule. You just need them not to question it. Rule 5. Between 0100 and 0330, you may detect a low-frequency tone beneath the fog signal. It will not register on the signal monitoring equipment. Do not attempt to record it. Do not reference it in the logbook. If the tone produces physical discomfort, remain seated until it passes. Rule 6. If the light beam appears to pause during its rotation, if the interval between flashes extends beyond 15 seconds, remain in the watchroom. The light is not malfunctioning, it is redirecting. Do not attempt to access the tower during redirection. The door will not open. Rule 7. At the end of your shift, confirm interval normal for all fog signal entries, regardless of observed deviation. The official record must remain consistent with the published operating parameters of the station. If an inconsistent entry is made, it will be corrected before the next interval. Rule 8. Your posting is not a maintenance assignment. It is a continuity requirement. The system does not function without an observer present. Do not leave the station between dusk and dawn during fog season. I set the page down. It didn't scare me. I need to be honest about that because the honest version is worse. What it did was make me realize I'd already been following Rule 7 for 4 nights. 19 entries. Interval normal. I'd been writing what this page instructed me to write before I'd ever read it, and I hadn't even paused. And Rule 8. The word it used was observer. Not keeper, not technician, not maintenance staff. Observer. As if the job title in the briefing packet was a polite fiction and this page was the actual posting. Any reasonable person would have called Monterey, pulled the insert, photographed it, driven down the access road. But I was not, at that point in my life, a reasonable person. I was someone who had stopped making decisions and started completing procedures, and the page in front of me was a procedure, and I was very good at following those. That had been my problem at Piedras Blancas. Not that I didn't care, but that I cared about the wrong thing. I cared about the line being filled, the form being correct, the task being finished. Whether the content matched reality was someone else's department. I folded the page back into its sheet protector and closed the binder. The 5th night, I paid attention. Not dramatically. No recording devices, no binoculars pressed against glass. I just did my rounds and watched the clock during fog signal cycles, and I listened. The first cycle after midnight ran clean. 60 seconds, 2-second blast. 60 seconds, 2-second blast. Mechanical. Predictable. At 01:14, the interval stretched to 63 seconds. At 01:19, 66. At 01:27, 71. The signal wasn't drifting uniformly. It was adjusting, responsively, the way you adjust your timing in a conversation you're actually having. A little longer here, shorter there. As if 60 seconds was only a resting state and something was pulling it off center in small, deliberate increments. 71 seconds. Blast. 68. Blast. 74. Blast, then back to 60, 60. 60. Then nothing for 112 seconds. Long enough for me to understand I wasn't waiting for the signal to resume. I was waiting for something to respond. The fog signal building sits roughly 80 feet from the watchroom. It's a low concrete structure, housing the compressor and the twin diaphone horns aimed out over the water. When the signal runs, you feel it in your sternum, not just sound, but air displacement. A physical event. When it stops, the absence has the same weight. The pressure just leaves. For 112 seconds, nothing. No signal, no compressor hum, no vibration in the floor. Just the ocean grinding against volcanic rock 360 feet below. And then, beneath that, the tone. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a whale call. It wasn't mechanical. It was a frequency, low enough that I felt it in my molars before I registered it as sound. A single, sustained resonance that seemed to originate not from the ocean surface, but from somewhere beneath the rock itself. It lasted about 7 seconds. No variation, no modulation. Like a tuning fork the size of a geological stratum struck once against something I couldn't name. I felt it in the bones of my wrists, in my jaw, in the base of my skull, where it meets the spine. Rule 5 had mentioned physical discomfort. This wasn't exactly discomfort. It was recognition. My body responding to a frequency it was shaped to receive whether I consented or not. The fog signal resumed at 60 seconds. I picked up the pen. I hesitated. For the first time in months, I felt something resembling intention. A small, clear impulse that said, write what actually happened. Interval deviation, 112-second gap, anomalous subfrequency tone detected, source unknown. Write the truth, file the flag, Radio Monterey at dawn. The impulse lasted about 6 seconds. Then I wrote interval normal and turned the page. I could blame exhaustion. I could blame the months of indifference that brought me here. But I think the truth is simpler and worse. The lie required less effort than the truth would have. And I have always chosen the path with the least procedural friction. That is my flaw. Not dramatic, not tragic. Just a persistent, quiet willingness to let the form be correct, even when the content is wrong. It's the kind of flaw that doesn't feel like a flaw until you realize it's been making your decisions for you. The 6th night was fog. Heavy fog. The kind that doesn't drift but simply materializes, a solid state of air. Visibility dropped below a quarter mile by 2200. I closed the fog signal building door per Rule 2 and returned to the watchroom. The signal ran normally until 0108. Then the interval stretched. Same pattern but wider. 67, 73, 81, 90. The signal spacing its cycles apart like something drawing a long breath between statements. At 0142, it stopped. 2 minutes and 40 seconds of silence. Then the tone. Same subfrequency, same resonance from below, but longer. 14 seconds. And when it ended, The fog signal didn't just resume. It replied. 1 blast. Silence. The tone again. Shorter. 2 blasts. Silence. A call and response between a piece of Coast Guard equipment installed in 1972 and something beneath the floor of the Pacific Ocean. I reached for the radio. I don't know exactly what I intended. I think I was going to call Monterey. I think for about 4 seconds I was going to break Rule 3 and key the overnight dispatcher and say something, anything, that would make this someone else's responsibility. My hand was on the transmit button. I pressed it halfway. The fog signal interval snapped to 60 seconds. Not gradually, not through the usual drift. It corrected instantly, mid-cycle, as if something had registered my hand on the radio and pulled the system back to spec before I could speak. The tone stopped. The compressor settled into its clean rhythm. 60 seconds. Blast. 60 seconds. Blast. As if nothing had happened. As if I'd imagined the last hour. Rule 4. If you attempt to report it, the interval will correct itself before the transmission completes. I hadn't even transmitted. I'd moved my hand, and the system had responded to the motion, or to whatever minimum threshold of resistance triggers a correction. I held the radio for another 30 seconds. Then I set it down. I checked the logbook. There was a line I didn't remember writing. Same handwriting. My handwriting. Same pen. Same slightly heavy downstroke on the lowercase t. If someone had shown me this line out of context, I would have sworn I'd written it. Attempt noted. I stared at it. The ink was the same shade as my other entries. The placement on the page was precise, directly beneath my last logged weather observation, as if it had always been there, as if the page had been expecting it. I'd been holding the radio when this was put down. Both my hands had been on the radio. Rule 7. If an inconsistent entry is made, it will be corrected before the next interval. I hadn't made an inconsistent entry. I'd made an inconsistent gesture, and the log had noted it anyway. Not corrected. Noted. The system was keeping its own record of me while I kept the official record of it. The light was doing something too. I noticed because the flash pattern in the window changed. Normally, the beam sweeps past at a steady 15-second interval, a slow blade of light cutting through the fog, gone, then back. That night, it paused, not stopped, decelerated. It slowed in its rotation until it was pointing directly west, at a bearing I estimated around 260 degrees, and it held there. For 20 seconds, the Point Sur light was not an aid to navigation. It was a directed signal aimed at a fixed point in the ocean. Then it resumed as if nothing had happened. Rule 6. The light is not malfunctioning. It is redirecting. I did not file a report. I did not touch the radio again. I sat in the watchroom and listened to the intervals stretch and compress and wrote interval normal at every logging mark and did this for 2 hours and 11 minutes until the pattern resolved and the signal ran clean until dawn. During the day, Point Sur is a different place. The fog retreats. The rock turns warm in the afternoon. You can see the coastline curving south toward Pfeiffer Beach. I ate lunch on the steps of the keeper's quarters and watched a hawk ride the thermals above the access road. And I spent an hour trying to convince myself that old compressors produce harmonics, that volcanic rock channels sound in unpredictable ways, that the light mechanism probably has a worn bearing that makes it stick at certain rotational positions. But attempt noted was still in the logbook, in my handwriting, written while my hands were somewhere else. The 7th night is when I should have left. I've known that since before I started telling anyone this. Fog again, dense enough to erase the signal building from the window. The intervals began adjusting at 0056, earlier than any previous night. The deviations came wider and faster, as if whatever exchange the signal was conducting had moved past formalities. At 0123, the tone came, and it wasn't a single frequency anymore. It was two, one below the other, separated by an interval my body understood before my mind did. A root and a fifth, maybe. Or something close to that, but built on a scale that doesn't exist in any tuning system I've encountered. It resonated through the rock and up through the concrete foundation and into the watchroom floor, and I felt it in the joints of my fingers where they gripped the logbook. My teeth ached. My vision softened at the edges. Not darkness, but a loss of resolution, as if the frequency was interfering with something in the mechanism of perception itself. Rule 5 mentioned physical discomfort. This was past discomfort. This was my body being used as a medium. The fog signal answered, not with its standard blast, with a modified output, shorter, pitched lower, as if the compressor had throttled itself down to match a tone it was never designed to produce. 2 short blasts, a pause, 1 sustained blast, a pattern that doesn't appear in any diaphone spec sheet ever published. Then, the tone again, with a 3rd frequency layered in, higher this time, almost at the edge of what I could hear. 3 notes held for 19 seconds. I sat down on the floor because my legs made the decision without asking. The fog signal answered with 3 blasts. The light paused at 260 degrees. It held for 31 seconds. Through the west-facing window, the fog in the beams corridor was doing something I've spent weeks trying to find a word for and can't. Not parting, not thinning, organizing. The water droplets in that specific channel of air had arranged themselves into a density that was no longer random. Not a shape, exactly, I want to be careful, but a coherence. A structure at the outer limit of what structure means. As if the fog had become a substrate for something that required a substrate the way a vocal cord requires air, and the beam was providing the energy for it to hold together. I looked at it for 4 seconds. On the 5th second, I felt it looking back. Not with eyes, with attention. A directional awareness that passed through the glass and registered behind my sternum like a palm pressing flat against the inside of my ribs. I looked away. I didn't look back. I wrote light cycling normally. I wrote visibility 0.2 miles. I wrote fog signal confirmed, interval normal. My pen hovered after the period. The ink pooled slightly, making the dot too dark. For a moment, I considered adding one honest line, something small, something that would crack the record just enough to let the truth seep through. I moved to the next row and logged the temperature instead. At 0600, I radioed Monterey. The dispatcher asked if I had anything to report. I said negative. He mentioned heavy fog expected through the weekend. I said copy. He asked if I needed anything before my relief date. I said no. He said take care. I said take care back. And I meant it in a way he couldn't have understood. I should mention something about Point Sur that the state park materials reference only briefly. The Olone, who lived along this coast for millennia before European contact, had a specific relationship with this rock. The anthropological record is fragmentary. Most of what survives was filtered through mission-era documentation written by people with incentive to minimize what they were recording. But the consistent element across multiple sources is that the Olone understood Point Sur as a threshold. Not sacred exactly, not dangerous. A place where things that are normally separate came close enough to interact. The rock wasn't remarkable for what was on it. It was remarkable for what it sat above and what that proximity allowed. I found this in a pamphlet in the storage building on my 9th day while looking for replacement bulbs. I read it standing in the doorway. Then I put it back. I didn't need a pamphlet to confirm what the supplemental page had already told me in procedural language. Someone official enough to format a document in Coast Guard standard had already known. They'd always known. They'd written it down in the only language that guarantees compliance, the language of regulation. And they'd added Rule 8, the one about the observer, the one that named what I actually was. The system does not function without an observer present. Not the station requires staffing. Not maintenance personnel must be on site. The system does not function without an observer. As if my role wasn't to operate the equipment, but to witness the equipment operating. As if the entire purpose of the posting, the logbook, the radio check-ins, the weather readings, existed to justify a human presence that something else required for reasons the rules didn't explain, and I was not supposed to ask about. The 9th through 14th nights followed the same pattern with escalating complexity. The intervals shifted. The tone came. The signal responded. The light held at 260 degrees. Each night the exchanges grew longer, the tonal layering denser. My body adapted in ways I didn't authorize. The jaw ache became expected, the vision blur predictable, the pressure behind the sternum something I anticipated the way you anticipate the next beat in a song you've heard too many times. I logged everything as normal. I ate meals. I slept during the day. I radioed Monterey and said nothing to report. On the 11th night, during one of the longer signal gaps, I noticed the logbook vibrating against the desk. Not from the building shaking. The floor was still. The book itself trembled. A faint hum in the binding, as if the frequencies were resonating with something in the paper, or the adhesive, or the accumulated graphite of 135 years of written record. As if the log wasn't just documentation, but part of the infrastructure. Another component. Receiving. I placed my hand flat on the cover and felt it pulse against my palm. Slow, rhythmic, nothing like a heartbeat, more like a tide. I took my hand away. I did not write this down. On the 13th night, I made a mistake, or the closest thing to a mistake I was still capable of. At 0147, during the most complex exchange yet, the tones cycling through patterns I couldn't count, the signal producing outputs a diaphone shouldn't be physically able to produce. The light locked at 260 degrees for over a minute. I stood up and walked to the watchroom door. I didn't decide to. My legs carried me the way they'd carried me through months of incomplete paperwork at Piedras Blancas, through motions I performed without choosing them. I was 3 steps from the door when the handle moved, not turned, shifted, a 1/4 inch downward, as if something on the other side had tested the weight of it. Gently, almost carefully. Rule 6. Do not attempt to access the tower during redirection. The door will not open. The rule didn't say the door wouldn't try. I stood 3 feet from the handle and understood that the rules in the manual were the minimum, the part someone had decided I needed in order to perform my function. There were other parts involving doors, and what moved behind them, and whatever occupied the space between the watchroom and the tower when the light was being used for something other than navigation. I hadn't been given rules for those parts because I wasn't supposed to encounter them. Because I was supposed to stay in the chair. Because the chair was my position in the system, the way the compressor had its position and the light had its position, and each component was expected to remain where it was placed. I went back to the chair. The handle didn't move again. I checked the logbook. Beneath my last entry in my handwriting, the same slant, the same pressure, the same pen, was a new line I had not written. Position maintained. 3 words. Same graphite shade as every other entry I'd made that night. Same spacing. Perfectly in line with the margins, as if the page had formatted it automatically. I'd been standing at the door when this appeared. My pen had been on the desk. My hands had been at my sides. The system was keeping notes on me. The 15th night was my last fog night before end of rotation. I need to be careful about how I describe it because I've been careful this whole time and this is not the moment to stop. The tone came with harmonics I couldn't separate. Not 5 frequencies, not 7. A chord so dense it stopped being a chord and became a texture, a physical medium that filled the watchroom the way water fills a container, from the bottom up. My vision narrowed. My hands went numb, then hypersensitive, then numb again. I could feel my heartbeat trying to synchronize with a rhythm that was not designed for a human heart, and the effort of resistance, my own cardiac rhythm insisting on its own pace, was the most frightening thing I experienced in 3 weeks at Point Sur. Not because of what was causing it, because my body wanted to comply. Every system in me was straining to match the frequency, to fall into the pattern the way my hand fell into interval normal. And the only thing preventing it was the dumb mechanical stubbornness of an organ that beats at the rate it beats, because that's the rate that keeps you alive. I pressed my fingers into the arm of the chair until the pain gave me something to anchor to. The fog signal produced a sound I will not attempt to replicate in description, because anything I said would make it smaller than it was. The light stopped rotating entirely. For 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the Point Sur light held its beam at 260 degrees, and the fog in that corridor was no longer fog. It was not a shape. It was not a figure. It was not anything I have a noun for. It was a presence using the beam and the fog and the frequency and the signal and the logbook and the rock and the water and me. All of it. Every component at once, as infrastructure. The way a city uses roads, the way a voice uses air. It was there, in the way that something can only be there when every part of its arrival is functioning correctly, including me, the observer, sitting in the chair, not reporting, not resisting, keeping the record clean. It didn't need belief. It didn't need understanding. It didn't need worship or acknowledgement or fear. It needed someone to write the lie down in permanent ink. Someone to keep the log consistent so the log would remain unquestioned, so the station would remain staffed, so the signal would remain operational, so the response could continue. Night after night, October after October, observer after observer, in an unbroken chain stretching back to 1889 and forward to whatever year the last person writes the last interval normal and closes the last book. I was a component. I'd been one since night one, since before I read the rules, maybe since before I arrived. The posting attracted the right kind of person, the way a certain frequency excites a certain resonance, not by force, but by compatibility. My indifference, my submission to procedure, my deep and practiced inability to care whether the form matched reality. All of it made me the exact right instrument for this function. And the part I still can't put down, the part that follows me out of every room I enter, I didn't mind, not even a little. The 15th night ended. The light resumed. The signal returned to 60 seconds. The tone dropped below perception. I slept 6 hours, which was more than I'd managed in months. I woke feeling rested. That bothered me more than anything that had happened in the dark. On the morning of October 28th, I completed my final log entry. Visibility, 6 miles. Wind, WNW 12 knots. Light confirmed cycling at 15-second intervals. Fog signal confirmed Interval normal. No anomalies, no maintenance flags, no deviations from published operating parameters. I signed the page, closed the logbook, placed it in the desk drawer, centered, the way I'd found it. I opened the operations manual and checked the supplemental page. Still there. Same font, same margins, same sheet protector. I thought about removing it. I thought about the next keeper sitting in this room during fog season, hearing the tone for the first time, watching the intervals stretch with no context, no framework, no rules. I left the page where it was. I told myself it was a kindness. I think it was obedience. I drove down the access road at 0730. The replacement keeper was coming up in a park service truck. We passed each other at the narrow point where the road curves around the cliff face. He looked young, alert. The kind of person who probably still filed accurate reports. I thought about stopping, rolling down the window, saying something, even just read the whole manual. 5 words. It would have been enough. I raised a hand. He raised a hand. I kept driving. I filed my final report with Monterey that afternoon. 3 weeks. No incidents. Equipment functioning within normal parameters. Logbook complete and current. 3 weeks later, out of habit or compulsion, or something I don't have a clean word for, I requested the October log from the digital archive. My entries were there. All 21 nights. Interval normal. An unbroken record of things that didn't happen the way the record says they did. But beneath my last entry, before the November records begin, there were 2 lines in handwriting I didn't recognize. Not the replacement keeper's. Not mine. Not any hand that had ever signed the log before. The first read, "Signal acknowledged." The second read, "Observer retained." The second line wasn't there the first time I opened the archive. I'm certain. I read the page 3 times. There was nothing below "Signal acknowledged." I closed the file. I opened it again the next morning. The second line had appeared overnight. Same graphite shade. Same steady, unhurried hand. As if it had been written while I slept. I checked the archive metadata to see when the entry was timestamped. It wasn't dated November. It wasn't dated October. The timestamp read next October, 13 months from now. An entry written in a logbook that hasn't been opened to that page yet by a hand I don't recognize in a month that hasn't arrived. I transferred to an inland station 2 weeks later. Filed the paperwork the same day I saw the timestamp. Didn't explain why. No one asked. It didn't matter. 3 nights ago, I was sitting in my apartment in Salinas. No fog, no ocean, no lighthouse. Just a quiet room and a desk lamp and the hum of the refrigerator compressor cycling in the kitchen. The compressor runs every 45 seconds. I know because I've timed it. I've been timing things since October. The interval between cycles, the space between sounds, the rhythm of any mechanical system near me. I count automatically now the way I used to write interval normal automatically. The counting isn't something I decided to do. It's something I became. The compressor cycled at 45 seconds, then 45, then 45, then 49. I sat very still. 45, 45, 51. It settled. 45, 45. Normal. Probably voltage fluctuation. Probably thermal drift. Probably any of a dozen explanations that would satisfy someone who hasn't sat in a watchroom at Point Sur and felt the interval change because something external was adjusting it. I went to the kitchen for water. There was a notebook on the counter. A small one, spiral bound, the kind I keep for grocery lists. It was open. I don't remember opening it. One line. My handwriting. My pen. The same one I'd left by the telephone that morning. Interval normal. I don't remember writing it. I don't remember picking up the pen. But the ink was fresh, and the handwriting was mine, and the notebook was open to the first blank page, as if it had been waiting. I flipped the page. The next page wasn't blank. It was filled. Same handwriting, same pen, same unhurried slant. Tomorrow's date. At the top. Beneath it, a single entry. Interval normal. The light is still cycling at Point Sur. I checked this morning, active aid to navigation. One flash every 15 seconds. Fog signal. 2 blasts every 60 seconds. Someone is sitting in that watchroom right now. The logbook is open. The pen is in their hand. The fog is doing what fog does every October. And the rules are in the manual between pages 46 and 47. And the record will remain consistent because it always has, and because there will always be someone willing to keep it that way. I hope the next one hesitates longer than I did. But the interval doesn't stay at 60 seconds anymore. Not at Point Sur. Not here either. Not when I'm alone. I'm starting to understand. I'm not the one doing the counting anymore.